Hello, my name's Steve Jackson and I'm a photographer from Hertfordshire in the UK. I shoot film and have exclusively done so for around 10 years. Back when I was studying photography at school, my dream camera was a Hasselblad, and as a student there was no way I could afford one, but about 10 years ago pro photographers were shopping in their analogue kit and upgrading to digital cameras. And I was at long last able to get the camera that I dreamt of, which is a Hasselblad 501cm, quite a late film production model from Hasselblad. It's a mechanical camera, clockwork, and essentially it's a box with a mirror in it, a back with some film in it, a lens with a shutter in it. It uses a waist level finder, which I find particularly easy to compose with. It produces a 6x6 centimetre square image on a negative, and it's as good as I hoped it would have been. Considering this is Cambridge Photography Week, I would like to start by showing you some photos I've made in and around Cambridge using this camera. So the first image I would like to show you is of an area called the Backs, and about 6 years ago I was working in Cambridge, and on days that I thought there might be a little mist, a little fog, some atmosphere, I would get up particularly early and head into Cambridge, and with any luck that mist and fog had penetrated the city centre. Quite often it didn't, but on occasions it did. And this time I'm photographing some gates that are particularly attractive, and in the mist and fog some street lamps cast rays through a lot of the ironwork, and just as I was taking a few photos there, some porters came to unlock a neighbouring college's gates, and I asked if they wouldn't mind featuring in my photo, and they didn't mind, so I stood them within my frame and asked them to be still for 2 minutes, and one of them got what I meant and the other not so much. And at the time I was slightly frustrated that this guy was chatting. I mean, they're strangers, they can do what they like. I'm pleased that they were happy to feature in the photo. Anyway, it wasn't until I got the film processed and scanned that I actually, I couldn't have planned it better. I quite like the fact that this chap is ghostly-like. He's moving around, so the long exposure has meant that he's kind of phased out slightly. The other one, I couldn't believe how still he was. I don't think I know anyone that could have been that still. Obviously well practiced at that college. Anyway, technically speaking, it's shot on Ilford Delta 100, which is a fine grain, low contrast film that I usually develop in an Ilford chemical called perceptal, which is made for the film. It's 4 fine grains, and you end up with a very fine grain quality image that can be printed very large. And I'm particularly fond of this image. I have a copy of it on my wall, and I hope you like it too. The next image is shot not far away from the Backs. I think it's called, you walk over the river, and I think it's called Trinity Lane. And if you live in Cambridge or have visited Cambridge, you've undoubtedly got this picture for yourself. And it's a very popular scene. The houses have got some really unusual chimneys, and there's no cars down it ever. And obviously, because it's Cambridge, there's always cyclists. And on this particular morning, it might have even been the same morning, the people are starting to wake and started to go to work and do what they've got to do for the day. And I noticed a cyclist coming towards me and changed the shutter speed to something that might freeze the cyclists. Otherwise, there's no way you can make. In fact, I've shot lots of photos in Cambridge, and most of them are several minutes long. And there's people that come and chat to me and walk past the frame, and they cycle past. And quite often I'll name the picture after the people I've met while I've taken the photo, but there's no sign of them. You can't see them. They don't feature at all. One chap, in fact, spent a good 5 minutes talking to me, or we're chatting to each other, but he spent about 5 minutes actually within my frame, and I knew that he wasn't going to feature. That I was shooting slide film at the time, and the exposure, in a very, very dark location, the exposure was about half an hour, so I knew he wouldn't feature. But that's the nice thing about long exposures, but also the frustrating thing, I like people in photographs. So as I say, I changed the settings to be able to capture this cyclist coming towards me. And although it's quite a dark photograph, I think there's quite a lot of atmosphere and mood to it. It helps that it's foggy always. So I hope you like this. Thank you. Okay, the next photograph is, again, not far. It's a small city. It's a great place to take photos. It's very easy to walk around and, of any time of day, really. I love it when it rains. There's fantastic reflections that can be found in puddles and that sort of thing. There's always some interesting characters, usually. I do enjoy shooting in Cambridge. So again, possibly again the same morning. There was probably only 3 mornings that the mist and fog was thick enough to sort of make any kind of decent atmosphere. And so this is, I think, the main high street. Campkins Cameras is just next to me, and it's early enough that there really aren't that many people around. But again, there's binmen in the distance, I think, and people are starting to go around there, get to work or whatever they're doing that day. But it's maybe 6 minutes long, the exposure, so none of them really feature. You can see in the distance, I think it's Keys University or Keys College. There's the church as well, and it's just timeless. Again, Cambridge has that kind of character about it, and using Ilford Delta 100. So on days when the mist and fog didn't quite penetrate the city centre, I'd often, because I was too early for work, I'd often turn around and head out into the countryside. And on this occasion, I headed back the way I came to the Mullard Radio Observatory. And one of the radio dishes is abandoned. I mean, it's in good state of repair. It doesn't look like it's abandoned, but it's definitely sort of a pre-digital age. And the mist and fog was still lying around. There's a theme to my photos, is often involving mist and fog. But I had on this occasion one of my favourite colour films, which is Ektachrome tungsten. I think it was 64T. So it's a tungsten balanced, white balanced film, essentially made for shooting indoors under lighting indoors. But I really enjoy using it out and about in natural light, either with a filter, a daylight balanced filter. It gives you a slightly warmer tone, or shooting it without a filter and you end up with very blues, cold looking images, which can look nice too. But it's super fine grain, you can't see any grain on it. And obviously colour. So I'm waiting for enough light to be able to silhouette the dish against the sky, and before the sun came up, an amazing colour filled the sky. You know, if I hadn't used tungsten film, it would have looked great, but this tungsten film made it purple. It was quite purpley anyway, but I just really like the colour of this particular shot. Yeah, that's that one. I hung around actually until the sun did come up. I was hoping for rays coming through a lot of the ironwork on the actual dish. Didn't happen for whatever reason. I've never experienced it, but it doesn't stop me from looking occasionally. And I was shooting, I used to have two backs, and so I could have one film in one and another type of film in another. And in this back I had Velvia, which most people have heard of. It's a super saturated slide film, quite difficult to use in the wrong conditions. In the right conditions, it just makes incredible images. And I decided to do a double exposure. The most basic sort of double exposure I do, which is flip the camera on its side, take the photo one way. The foreground is in dark, you know, it's in darkness. So I don't have to try and cover up part of the image so that it's not exposed. The nature of the image, the silhouette type image, means that the sky is going to expose the film and the silhouette part of it isn't. So I flip the camera on its side, take a shot, and then flip it on the other side and take a shot, and you end up with a mirror-like flipped image of the antenna. And it's got some very saturated colours there due to the film I was using. So I hope you like that. And what I'm going to do actually is show you now a clip that I did recently. So unfortunately the wind was so strong that the audio is messed up on the day of filming, so I'm just going to narrate over the top of the way that I make double exposures, or this particular type of double exposure. As you can see, I'm using a tripod. It does make it easier using the camera on its side, because it's a reversed image inside the waist level finder can mess with your mind slightly. So it just makes it easier. And you know, there's no camera movement to be considered. There's also, I'm just focusing on the sky, which is going to be the subject of this photo, and pointing out that it's sunny. So you can use the sunny 16 rule. It happens to be 125 f16. And then I put the camera on its side and level the center of the image with the horizon, or put the horizon in the center of the image, and then I cover up the bottom half because I don't want any of the fields in the shot. So I'm just using my hand to cover up the bottom half of the frame, and so that part of the negative will be unexposed and the sky will be exposed on the top half. And then I can grab the dark slide, put that into the back of the camera, and that allows me to take the back of the camera off, and I can cock the shutter, and then placing the film back on, take the dark slide out, and I'm ready to expose the same piece of negative, the same frame of film, with the second exposure, which again is the sky. I'm going to center the image just as I did before with the horizon, and just use my hand to cover it just as I did before, and then take a picture. And that's it. For this photo I used I think it was Fuji Provia 100F, but I cross-processed it in C41 chemistry, so ended up with a negative, which gives you some funky colours and some other effects as well, which are quite fun. It's quite a fun image on a day where essentially there's not really much of a subject out there, just lots of fields, and the sort of lenses I have don't allow you to capture the amazing aerial display that the red kites were giving us up there. So you've got to go with what equipment you have, and that's it. Thank you. And we're back in the city centre, and this time it's sunny to make a change. There's no mist and fog, and we're there on a family day out. We'd often visit Cambridge, grab a bite to eat, go and sit by the river. They'd go shopping, and I'd maybe wander around with a camera, see what we could find. And on this occasion we parked up at Castle Hill, and on the way down I spotted a lady admiring the view from the bridge, and the sun was in a position that highlighted her hair, and there's an old bike next to her. So as I passed, I wandered into the road, quickly snapped this and carried on going. It's shot on Kodak XR 100, which is a fine-grained colour negative film, and I really like it. It gets a bad press for some reason. Underexpose it, you get cooler, bluer tones. Overexpose it, and it becomes kind of pastel-y in its rendition of colour. And I don't use a light meter. So it's got a huge latitude, which is perfect for someone who's lazy like me. You can shoot it 5 stops over, and it will still give you a usable negative. And it's definitely a favourite film of mine, and I recommend using it. And we're back to some more black and white images. They're almost identical, these two. They're using Kodak Tri-X again, which allows a little extra speed in the shutter, and you can capture things obviously that are moving. So in one we've got no ducks, and in the other we've got some ducks. The details are superb. You can make out all the names of the punts, and the way the bridge disappears into the mist in the background. It's a typical Cambridge type scene, and all the better, I think, for the atmosphere. And it's just another in that series. I don't only use the Hasselblad. I have a number of other cameras, or a couple of other cameras, one of them being a Cine-RP, which is a large format 5x4 sheet film camera. It is quite a lot larger than the Hasselblad and a bit more time consuming to use, but it's a lot of fun nonetheless. You don't want to carry it too far. I thought I could carry it around the coast of Cornwall once and managed to ruin my back. But it does make nice images, and you get the added benefit of being able to use the rise and fall and shift movements of a view camera. It's essentially made for studio work, but also it's made for architecture. You can straighten the vertical lines when you're shooting buildings. You may want to exaggerate those lines, which is known as tilt shift photography, and I've enjoyed using it in and around Cambridge. Made some nice images using some of the features that this kind of camera has. I think in Cambridge I mainly used Ilford Delta 100, which I spoke about before. Obviously in 4x5 negatives, 4x5 inch size negatives, the details are incredible, and they're well worth sort of having a good close look at. They sort of blow your mind with how detailed they can be. Definitely rival anything large format or medium format digital cameras can make. They're obviously not as user-friendly, and there's obviously the processing and that sort of thing, and the scanning of the actual negatives themselves. But I think overall, it's a very satisfying process, and I enjoy using it. I haven't used it for a couple of years now because I've been concentrating on square photos for a couple of years. So I'm looking forward to finishing this project and being able to start using that camera again. And I've got a load of film in the freezer which is waiting for me to use. So here's a few images I've made with it. Different locations in and around Cambridge. You recognise probably a couple of them from previous photos I've spoken about. I don't only just photograph in Cambridge. I photograph everywhere, anywhere I take a camera, which is basically anywhere I go. And on family holidays, I try and go shooting in the morning. I get up before anyone else has, in the dark quite often, and in the summer that means kind of 3 o'clock. And go for an explore around the coast or wherever we happen to be staying. Hopefully make some photos, and then come back for when the rest of the family are waking and perhaps thinking about breakfast. I've done my adventuring for the day, and I'm happy to spend the day doing whatever they want to do. And here are some photos I've shot in different places. Firstly, in the Gow Peninsula, which is a beautiful place in South Wales. It's Britain's first area of natural beauty, and it's well deservedly so. There's it's such a varied coastline. You've got cliffs, you've got sandy beaches, and in the centre of the Gow Peninsula you've got woodland and moors. It's a place I really enjoy shooting. So first I'd like to show you is an area in the north of the peninsula. There's a number of dunes, and set within the dunes there are some pine forests, little pockets of pine forest, and I happened to stumble across a particularly kind of garden-like scene. It was almost like someone actually looked after it, and I think it's quite strange to find such a wild place looking so kept. So it's a number of pine trees in amongst the dunes, and it was quite a difficult photograph to get the position that I wanted. I had to try and get the camera as high up as possible so that you could get some idea of the dunes going off in the distance. It's shot on Kodak Ektar 100 again, decent film, and looks great here. It picks out the colour. I will admit to, and something I also do, I don't approach a scene without being a bit careful about what I'm treading on. You might regret stumbling too far into a scene if you leave footprints, or especially in snow or on sand, and the same goes here with grass. So I was very careful about disturbing the scene, but I did do a little bit of gardening and moved some twigs and some sticks that had fallen, and combed the grass a little. It was already pretty much done by the wind, but there's no point trying to Photoshop something if you can do it right there and then. So a little bit further on from there, along the same walk, it's a gorgeous walk, and the kids love it because it's quite flat and easy, and there's lots of interesting things they find. So a bit further on is a lighthouse. I think it's an iron lighthouse. It's now disused, but at certain tides, low tide, you are able to walk out and get very close. You can touch it and have a good look at it. It's quite a long walk, so you might want to look at it from a distance, but here's a couple of shots of, or at least one shot that I've taken of that. And then a bit further round, the landscape changes again, and you've got salt marshes, Pretty dry salt marshes. I haven't required wellies or anything like that to get around there. But there, again, there's these sort of outcrops and small, shallow islands of pine trees. And I like the way that the flora was sort of providing a little bit of foreground interest. There's some samphire growing and some other flora here and there that is providing some flowers, and I wondered how it might look if I focused ahead on the actual island itself, and it meant that the foreground is out of focus, but it kind of gives it a nice depth. I also wondered if it ever flooded. We wasn't there at the right time of year for a high tide, but perhaps in Easter you might get a high tide that would flood this salt marsh. I imagine it does, and you might get some really cool reflections of this island of trees. And but to sort of emulate that, you know, I referred to my sort of old favourite double exposure, the mirroring, flipping thing, and made a kind of mirror image of it. It kind of looks like a reflection of an island. Some people mistake it for reflection, so that's quite nice, but you can see in the clouds that they're reversed. Yeah, so I hope you like that. Another location that we love to go on holiday is Cornwall, along with the rest of the UK, and it's easy to see why. You know, it's a stunning place, beautiful beaches, and we usually try and stay somewhere that is within walking distance of the coastline, so that I haven't got to drive in the morning, wake everyone on the campsite up. We haven't got to drive during the day, you know, when the rest of everyone else is on the roads. Something else that getting up early has enabled me to appreciate and see over all the other people in bed is some of the beaches under moonlight, and it's stunning. You know, I really wanted to try and capture what my eyes were seeing. It's dark, so it's difficult to do with film, difficult to do with a digital camera, but with film and its limitations, you know, you've got long exposures involved, so a lot of what's happening you can't capture in any kind of, you know, the waves are moving and that sort of thing, so everything's got to be a long exposure. But on this particular beach, which isn't a beach at high tide, but at low tide, there's some really interesting sand patterns. There's some movements that the sea does around a lot of the bars and the banks that are on this beach that make for some really interesting shapes, and the headland is quite beautiful as well. So I spent a number of hours mooching around under the moonlight. It played tricks with my eyes, actually. It felt so bright, you know, the moon was so large and so bright that it really did feel like daylight. And I had never shot under moonlight before, and it totally threw my metering, you know, inside my head. I thought, this has got to be like street lighting. It's nowhere of the sort, it's a lot darker, but it just, you know, I could see everything. So I only got to learn of my mistake when I was able to get some internet and researched on what you should probably expose a scene under moonlight, and you know, I was way out. So this is shot on Kodak Ektar 100, which is a slow film anyway, but underexposed, it's going to be blue. But I did what I could in processing and pushed the film as much as possible. And I've learned actually that if you expose a scene that's lit by moonlight correctly, it just looks like daylight. You can't really, if there's stars in the sky, you might get to see some star trails, but it just looks like daylight. So I think in retrospect, I kind of like the look of the blue tones, and it does actually feel like it's moonlight rather than it just being a perfectly exposed daylight photo. It obviously has its limitations shooting on film. You have to do a certain length of exposure, and so nothing is frozen in time. You know, I would have loved to have captured a lot of the patterns that the waves were making, but instead you just end up with a sort of mist, as you'd expect from a long exposure. You know, it's such an experience being on some of those cliffs in stormy weather. I love seeing big seas, and I've been lucky enough to witness some very large storms, not particularly in summer, but I have made one dedicated trip to Cornwall maybe 8 or so years ago. But as I say, even during the summer you're going to get some interesting weather. This was shot at Perranporth, and we've stayed in Perranporth. It's a great place to stay. It's good for the kids, they can go out and they've got stuff to do in the evening and that's the thing, and I'm close to the coast so that I can go walking, and you can walk to St Agnes and to several other coves along from Perranporth. Perranporth beach itself is beautiful, very busy during the day, but the time I'm there, you know, you wouldn't know it. And I've made several of my favourite photographs there. You know, it's not what you'd call the most scenic of beaches, but you know, in the right conditions, you know, anywhere's good. As I say, I have travelled to Cornwall and camped by myself for a number of days, and I was lucky to be there when I can't remember what the name of the storm was, but it was a huge storm hit. It caused the train line on South Devon to be ripped up, so you might remember that. So the storm was hitting the south coast, and the north coast was in its lee, and so it wasn't as dangerous. So I went to Metallic Mines, which apparently is the most photographed place in the UK, I would say, not just Cornwall, but in the UK. And I'm there with Kodak Hector again, would you believe? And a couple of people told me where to go. I'd never been there before, and found a good place to, well, I wasn't standing, you know, I had to try and hide. In fact, the wind was so strong that I had no clue that any of these photographs would come out. I took a roll of Hector before I decided to get out of there because it was getting too dark. And I had to sit on my tripods. It didn't fly off, and I was certain they'd all have camera shake. Now, most of them did, but I was surprised to see that a number of them didn't. And this is one of those shots that, as you can see, the sea was really big, and it was pretty scary actually. By the time I'd packed away, it was essentially dark, and I could not really make out. And going prepared as I always do, I didn't have any kind of torch with me, and lucky enough the moon had just sort of come up over the headland and was just highlighting where I should go, kind of, but I did get a bit lost going back to the car. And but anyway, you know, that's part of the fun of it. Another place that we used to take family holidays at was the south of France, specifically the Ardèche region. And again, we're trying to stay close enough to the river so that I could go out early in the morning and go for walks and that sort of thing, come back and enjoy messing about with the kids during the day. We took a couple of day trips to Avignon, and you know, it's a beautiful city, really hot on this particular occasion, and we're mooching around and enjoying some of the sights and trying to cool down where we can. And in the distance, again, I noticed something that caught my eye. 3 nuns were walking towards the Palais de Papes, which is a beautiful building in the centre of Avignon. and I quickly had to stick another film in the back of the camera. I think the only film I had with me was Kodak Aerochrome, which is a slightly unusual, now discontinued film. Lots of people wish it wasn't discontinued. It's become seriously expensive now, but back then it was still kind of affordable, at least. And quickly shoved this film in the camera. I had to fit a filter on the front because it's best shot with a filter, a slightly unusual infrared filter. It's bright orange, and it gives you, so foliage turns bright red with it. It will turn skin orange. It does some other weird things, different materials, different. I've shot the changing of the guard in London with it, and it made the red uniforms turn yellow. It makes buses go yellow for some reason, red buses. But it's a really fun film. And as I say, I saw these three nuns, quickly prepared my camera and darted up behind them, made one shot, and I was happy to see the result. It's quite fun. It was originally intended for the military, I believe. So aerial surveillance, you would photograph or run a camera over a certain part of a jungle or something if you were flying overhead, and camouflage would be highlighted because it wouldn't turn red. That's what I understand from it. Might be wrong. But as I say, it's a film that every photographer should at least attempt to shoot once, because it is so rare now. I've taken a number of shots using it, and I'll try and show them to you now. So family holidays and photographic trips are great fun. I love exploring new places in the UK and abroad, but if I want to pursue my hobby of photography for the rest of the year, I look to North East Hertfordshire, my local area, to do that. It's not the most photogenic of counties. It does have its charm. There's some beautiful villages and some amazing woodland, but for the most part it's quite agricultural, quite rural, lots of large-scale farms, very, very similar to other places in the world that farm grains. I've lived here for 17 years and have photographed with different cameras for that time, but last decade or so using the Hasselblad. But for the last two, I've been concentrating on just shooting colour film, as I would like to publish my first book. I've made a couple of books in the past, but they've just been personal projects, but this time I would like to see if I can get it published. So it's a book that's going to contain images I've made locally, all shot on colour film and using the Hasselblad. Originally I got 700 eligible photos printed that I quickly whittled down to 250, and I've been choosing from this pool and trying to pair similar images together. Maybe they're linked tonal ranges, or perhaps it's a similar film, similar subject. But anyway, that's been fun trying to sort of stick photos together and come up with interesting pairings. So the project has had a number of working titles. To cut a long story short, hinted at the thousands of miles I've walked. Another was a portrait of North East Hertfordshire, which was catchy, but ultimately wasn't correct. I walk into Essex, which is fairly local, and up to Cambridgeshire and even across to Bedfordshire. So I've been working with the title of Transient, as it occurred to me that most, if not everything I photograph locally is, fleeting. It could be here today, gone tomorrow, or it could take a few years. I photographed great oaks that are no longer, they've been hit by lightning and are just stumps now. That's what I've been trying to concentrate on, and it's something I want to portray in this book. So the first image on this particular page is of the edge or the corner of a farm building, It's quite local to me, maybe about 5 miles walk away, and it's got some great light. I think on that particular morning the sun was filtered through a bit of cloud, and there was a bit of haze and fog sort of still lingering around, and the colour and the pattern in the corrugated iron is echoed in the field beyond, which I quite like. Simple photograph shot on Fuji Reala 100, which is a favourite film of mine. Unfortunately not available any longer. You know, Fuji have this habit of having amazing films and then just discontinuing them for no reason. Obviously a good reason, but yeah, it's an expired film, I think from 2005 or 2008, something like that. Still great, colours from it. It doesn't really act like an expired film. I don't make any alterations to my exposure or anything. And then it turns out its accompanying image, the image I decided to pair it with, was also shot on Fuji Reala 100. And it's so I'm walking on Royston Heath that morning, and in the distance I could see what looked like a small child, but can't have been, because that would have been at 6 o'clock in the morning or whenever it was. You wouldn't expect to see. So as I got closer and the fog lifted a little, I could make out that it was just a lost coat on a post. But its natural pose, and with the mist in the background, it sort of looked quite surreal. Yeah, it just seemed to fit with the other image. The colours are the same, it's the same film. There's a post in both of them. So just when you think you're not going to find any photos that morning, and you round the corner and you discover the circus are in town. Obviously at that time of the morning they're not performing, but I'm not after pictures of people for this particular project. It would have been great if there'd been a sad clown or something. But in any case, I liked the colours, and I was using a great film for colours on this occasion. And I like the fact that they painted the lorries in the same livery, and also the hose, the yellow hose, cutting through the grass diagonally, sort of adds to the composition, I think. So it's shot on Fuji Pro 400H, which Fuji in their wisdom have decided to stop producing. I think a lot of film photographers are probably considered giving up film photography because that's the film stock they counted on. I really didn't use a great deal of it. I always preferred Reala. But now, looking back, I wish I had. I think a lot of people bought hundreds of rolls just so that they could maintain the look of their photographs. And quite, lovely. It's a shame. I don't know what Fuji are doing and what they're playing at. But that's the nature of things. Things change. They're transient, just like the circus that was there one day and gone the next. And then I've paired it with a very similar looking photograph. Again, I hadn't considered at the time, but it's actually shot on the same film stock, Fuji Pro 400H. The compositions are quite similar. They mirror each other in some respects. The colours obviously similar. And I just thought they went well. So our Hertfordshire winters are usually quite bland, quite wet, quite warm, always muddy, and but on this occasion we had some freezing temperatures, and my wife and I were on our way to the supermarket, and I spotted something on the side of the road, quite unusual, quite beautiful. Knew I wanted to come back and photograph it, but this road is a notorious accident hotspot, and was certain I wouldn't be able to do so during the day. It's a cut through between two major arteries, the A10 and the A1, and there's some huge vehicles that go down it. It's littered with wind mirrors, and there's no footpaths. It's literally suicide to attempt to photograph there during the day. So I got up at 2 o'clock the next morning and walked a few miles to see if I could capture it at night. I used an expired Fuji 160 NPS film. It's long expired, long gone. I have a head torch that I use to light it with. It's got a red lamp on it and a white lamp, but I also brought with me some sweet wrappers left over from Christmas, and also a Christmas pudding wrapper, which is orange, to see if I can change the colour of these ice formations, which were formed from traffic hitting puddles and throwing all the water up over the vegetation and the hedgerows. I found a number of these things that had been created by traffic, essentially, and the freezing conditions, and used all these different coloured filters to try and capture them, and I'm quite happy with quite a number of them. The next photo is of, it's actually photographed in midsummer, so a completely different time of year, but I thought the colours were matched quite well, although they're in reverse. I think that works quite well. It's shot on a long expired from the 80s Kodak Ektachrome 100 Plus, and it provided some really strange results, some really funky colours on photos that I didn't want funky colours. That kind of was a shame, but on a lot of the photos that I made, the pinks and the reds added something that I wouldn't be able to do myself. So moving on to the next pair of images, and I can tell you they're both definitely shot on the same film. Fuji Astia 100F, which is a gorgeous slide film that Fuji used to make, and my friend Floyd from Hawaii sent me 13 rolls of this great slide film. I've shot it before a couple of times, and I've made some 5:4 images using it as well. But this particular batch must have been stored really well. I think his friend kept it in a freezer, and it behaves just like new Astia film. So very excited to use it, and love making images with it. Shot some personal stuff with it, and also stuff for this project. Loved using it. Brilliant film, shame it's gone. But the first image I'm particularly proud of, because, and it's the reason why I'm talking to you now. Last year, Campkins Cameras, in conjunction with Cambridge Photography Week, through a competition, they had 3 themes: urban, landscape, and COVID. And I thought to myself, I have an image that seems to satisfy all 3 of those themes, so I entered it and won first prize, a beautiful Canon digital camera, which my son now uses on his architectural course, so it has gone to good use. The image itself, it's a favourite of mine. I've shot these swings on a number of occasions, and a lot of the other playground equipment, all in mist and fog, obviously. It's a small village green just up the road from me, and it's a good walk, and often there's mist and fog there. And then the next image is linked not only due to the colours of the film, because it's the same film, but also it's some COVID related. So it shows a football pitch that would normally be, muddy and well used, covered in stud marks and normally puddles of mud everywhere. But instead, this particular year, there was no sport happening. No one was allowed to mix. No contact sports were allowed. So the football pitch is covered in daisies, and which is quite unusual. And I guess in some respects it's the British alternative to the basketball hoop. Tale of two halves. I haven't got to walk too far from my house and find monuments made of hay dotted around the landscape. Usually the farmers here, they stack them into much larger haystacks. They consist of probably thousands of bales, but here they're on a much smaller scale. but that meant that they're sort of dotted throughout the field, and I enjoyed the way that they sort of appeared to be beckoning to each other. And of course the mist and fog helps with the essential bit of atmosphere. And then only a few weeks afterwards, once they had disappeared, I was out walking after a night of heavy rain and came across this pile of what I think is potash. It's some kind of nutrients for the crop in the forthcoming years or year. But as I say, it rained really heavily, and this pile of stuff, whatever it is, had taken on a kind of volcanic appearance with ravines that had sort of opened up down the sides of this volcano. In fact, I went there again to photograph it under moonlight because it's something that really caught my eye, and wanted to see if I could capture it better. But it had already gone, it had already been spread. So it sort of definitely fits the title of the book, or the working title I have currently. Yeah, well, that just about wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate your time, and please go check out Cambridge Photography Week, which is running between the 25th to the 30th of October. They've got a live show at the Guildhall in Cambridge on the 30th, where you'll be able to meet suppliers in person, see more presentations, that sort of thing. Thank you to Campkins cameras, and if you're interested in seeing more of my photography, I try and post daily on Instagram. I'll put the link below. Thank you so much, and I wish you good light. Cheers.